She said she was visiting her sister in Richmond. She packed an overnight bag, kissed him goodbye at the door, and drove away in their Chevrolet Impala at exactly 9:47 a.m. He watched from the kitchen window as she turned left onto King Street, disappearing into the gray morning traffic. It was a Thursday. Their daughter was at school. The coffee was still warm in his cup. By 10:15 a.m., Daniel Warren was following her. Not because he suspected anything specific. Not because there had been arguments or strange phone calls or unexplained absences. He followed her because 3 days earlier, a man from the Office of Security had shown him a photograph during his routine polygraph examination at Fort Meade. The photograph showed his wife, Catherine, standing outside a Safeway supermarket in Falls Church. The timestamp read February 28, 1977. The man in the photograph with her was Yuri Nozenko, a known KGB officer operating under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy. The examiner had asked, "Do you recognize this woman?" Daniel had answered, "That's my wife." The examiner had made a note and moved on to the next question. No one told Daniel what to do next. No one gave him instructions. No one told him not to go home. The examination ended at 4:30 p.m., and he drove back to Alexandria like he always did, stopping at the same 7-Eleven for cigarettes, arriving home at the same time. Catherine was making dinner. Their daughter was doing homework at the kitchen table. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Except now he knew that his wife had been photographed with a Soviet intelligence officer. And now, 3 days later, she was not going to Richmond. He stayed 4 cars behind her on Route 1, heading south. She drove carefully, never speeding, using her turn signals. At Springfield, she exited and turned into a shopping center parking lot. Daniel pulled into a gas station across the street and watched. She parked near a Woolworth's, got out, locked the car, and walked toward the store. She was wearing the blue coat he'd bought her for Christmas. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a suburban housewife running errands on a Thursday morning. She did not go into Woolworth's. She walked past it, past a shoe repair shop, past a dry cleaner, and stopped at a payphone near the edge of the parking lot. She made a call that lasted less than 30 seconds. Then she returned to her car and waited. 12 minutes later, a black Buick with no front license plate pulled into the lot and parked 3 spaces away from her. A man got out. He was wearing a dark overcoat and carrying a briefcase. He did not look at Catherine's car. He walked into the Woolworth's. Catherine got out of her car. She walked into the Woolworth's. Daniel waited exactly 5 minutes, then crossed the street and entered the store. He found her in the housewares aisle, looking at kitchen towels. The man was 2 aisles over, examining electric can openers. They were not speaking. They were not looking at each other. But Daniel had been trained at the Army Security Agency. He had spent 11 years monitoring Soviet communications. He knew what a brush pass looked like. He knew what a dead drop looked like. He knew what operational security looked like. His wife was conducting a meeting with a foreign intelligence officer in a Woolworth's in Springfield, Virginia. He left the store before she saw him. Before we continue with what Daniel Warren discovered that morning, tell us in the comments, what city and country are you watching from right now? And if you want to hear how this story ends, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because what happened next changed everything Daniel thought he knew about his life. The year 1977 marked a particular kind of exhaustion in the Cold War. The ideological fervor of the 1950s had calcified into institutional routine. The dramatic confrontations of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Berlin Wall had given way to détente, SAW, treaties, and the grinding bureaucratic machinery of mutual surveillance. The CIA and KGB had been watching each other for so long that the watching itself had become the primary activity, an end rather than a means. But beneath this surface calm, the real work continued. The work that didn't make headlines. The work that happened in suburban parking lots and government offices and defense contractor facilities across the United States. The Venona decrypts finally made public in 1995. would eventually reveal the stunning scope of Soviet espionage during the Cold War. But in 1977, counterintelligence professionals like Daniel Warren already understood the scale of the problem. They just couldn't talk about it. The Soviets had penetrated the Manhattan Project, the State Department, the Treasury, and numerous defense contractors. They had recruited scientists, engineers, military officers, and civilians. And they had done it not through dramatic recruitment pitches or coercion, but through patience, ideology, and exploitation of access. The most successful Soviet intelligence operations weren't the ones that made James Bond movies. They were the ones that ran for years without detection, built on relationships that looked entirely ordinary. A secretary at a defense contractor, a translator at the State Department, an engineer at a radar facility, a housewife in Alexandria, Virginia. Daniel Warren worked at the National Security Agency, though he would never have told anyone outside the intelligence community the actual name of his employer. To neighbors and family, he worked for the Department of Defense. His job was listed as communications specialist on official forms. In reality, he was a SIGINT analyst focused on Soviet military communications. He had a top-secret clearance with SCI access. He had been with NSA since 1966, recruited directly from the Army Security Agency when he finished his service. His work was technical, detail-oriented, and classified. He came home every evening and could tell his wife nothing about what he did. This was normal. This was expected. Thousands of people in the Washington area lived the same way, maintaining the compartmentalization that kept secrets safe. Catherine Warren had been a secretary at the State Department when they met in 1969. She quit when their daughter was born in 1971. She volunteered at the elementary school. She belonged to a book club. She made casseroles for church potlucks. She was exactly what she appeared to be, which is why she was perfect. The KGB understood something fundamental about American society in the 1970s. The suburbs were invisible. A woman shopping at Safeway, a man getting gas at a Shell station, a couple walking their dog through a new development. These people existed below the threshold of attention. The FBI could surveil Soviet diplomats. The CIA could track known intelligence officers. But they couldn't watch everyone. They couldn't watch the normal people, and Catherine Warren was aggressively normal. The brush pass Daniel observed in Woolworths was a technique refined over decades of operational experience. Two people enter a public space separately, conduct their business without apparent contact, and leave separately. No conversation, no obvious exchange, nothing that would attract attention. A shopping bag is left on a shelf. A newspaper is placed on a counter. A package is set down near a payphone. The item is picked up minutes later by someone else. If anyone is watching, they see nothing but ordinary human behavior. The Soviets called it impersonal communication. The CIA called it dead-drop operations. Daniel Warren called it what it was, his wife committing espionage. He returned to the gas station and waited. 23 minutes after entering Woolworths, Catherine came out carrying a small shopping bag. She walked to her car, got in, and drove away. The man in the dark overcoat emerged 6 minutes later, empty-handed, and returned to the black Buick. He drove north toward Washington. Daniel followed his wife. She drove to Richmond. She really did have a sister there. She spent the afternoon visiting, had dinner, and drove home that evening. She arrived at their house at 8:45 p.m., tired from the drive, carrying the shopping bag from Woolworths. Inside were 4 kitchen towels, a set of measuring cups, and a package of thumbtacks. She kissed Daniel hello and told him about her day. Her sister was doing well. They'd had lunch at a nice restaurant. Traffic had been terrible coming back. She did not mention Springfield. She did not mention Woolworths. She did not mention the man in the dark overcoat. Daniel helped her unpack the car. He asked about her sister's new job. He told her about his day, the parts he could tell her, which was almost nothing as always. Their daughter showed Catherine a spelling test, 95% one word wrong. They watched television for an hour, they went to bed. He lay awake until 3 a.m. watching his wife sleep, trying to calculate how long she had been doing this. The KGB's success in penetrating American society during the Cold War rested on a fundamental insight into human motivation. They understood that most people don't betray their country for money or excitement. They betray it for smaller, more comprehensible reasons. Because they believe in something. Because they're angry about something. Because they want to feel important. Because someone made them feel valued in a way their ordinary life never did. The most effective Soviet recruitments happened slowly, over months or years, building relationship and trust before any intelligence activity began. A friendship at a university. A conversation at a conference. A shared interest in peace activism or civil rights. The Soviets were patient. They could afford to be patient. Catherine Warren's recruitment, Daniel would eventually learn, had begun in 1968, before she even met him. She had been a student at Georgetown University, active in anti-war protests, attending meetings of groups that seemed entirely American but received funding and guidance from Soviet fronts. She had been spotted, assessed, and cultivated by a KGB officer named Alexei Kulak, who operated undercover as a cultural attaché at the embassy. Kulak never asked her to steal secrets. He never mentioned intelligence. He talked to her about peace, about the insanity of nuclear weapons, about the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower had warned against. He made her feel like her beliefs mattered. He made her feel seen. When she got the job at the State Department in 1969, she mentioned it to Kulak at one of the peace group meetings. He was delighted for her. He took her to lunch to celebrate. He asked her casually what kind of work she'd be doing. She told him. It was just typing, just filing, nothing important. He asked if she ever saw anything interesting. Sometimes, she said, cables from embassies, reports from overseas. He asked if she'd ever consider sharing some of those reports. Not secrets, nothing classified. Just things that might help people working for peace understand what the government was really doing. She said she'd think about it. 3 weeks later, she photographed her first document. By the time she met Daniel Warren at a Defense Department mixer in 1969, she had been passing information to the KGB for 4 months. When she quit her State Department job to have their daughter in 1971, Kulak told her it was fine. She could rest. No pressure. Just stay in touch. She stayed in touch. In 1975, when Daniel's security clearance was upgraded and he began bringing home technical manuals that he was supposed to review overnight, Catherine began photographing those too. Not all of them. Just the ones that seemed important. Just the ones with certain keywords. Kulak had given her a list: SIGINT procedures, Soviet communication frequencies, decryption methodologies, satellite reconnaissance capabilities. She photographed the documents at night while Daniel slept. She used a Minix camera that Kulak had given her, a device small enough to hide in a box of tampons. She returned the documents to Daniel's briefcase before morning. She made the dead drops once every 3 to 4 months, always at different locations, always using the protocols Kulak had taught her. She had been doing this for 9 years, and now Daniel knew. He went to work the next day like nothing had happened. He submitted his reports, he attended his meetings, he said nothing to anyone. At 3 p.m., he requested a personal meeting with his supervisor, Thomas Brennan, deputy director of the Soviet Analysis Division. Brennan was 57 years old, a career intelligence officer who had started with Army intelligence in 1945 and transitioned to NSA when it was created in 1952. He had survived 4 directors, 6 administrations, and countless reorganizations. He was a man who understood that intelligence work was 99% patience and 1% action. Daniel told him everything: the photograph from the polygraph, the surveillance on Thursday, the meeting in Woolworths, the brush pass he believed he had witnessed. Brennan listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Brennan opened a file drawer and removed a folder marked Homeward compartmented. He placed it on the desk between them. Tell us in the comments what time you're watching this video right now. And hit that subscribe button, because what was in that folder changed everything we know about how deep the betrayal went. The folder contained 47 photographs spanning 3 years. Catherine Warren meeting with 4 different men at locations across Northern Virginia and Maryland. Catherine Warren at a library in Bethesda, placing a book on a shelf. Catherine Warren at a rest stop on I-95 leaving a shopping bag near a vending machine. Catherine Warren at a bus station in Arlington, sitting on a bench with a newspaper. The surveillance had begun in April 1974. Daniel stared at the photographs. His wife, frozen in moments he had never known about, conducting a parallel life he had never suspected. In one image, she was wearing the yellow dress she'd worn to their daughter's 6th birthday party. In another, the gray coat she'd claimed to have lost. In another, standing beside their car in what looked like a Home Depot parking lot, handing something to a man Daniel didn't recognize. "We've been watching her for 33 months, Brennan said. His voice was flat, administrative. "We identified her as a potential asset through the Venona follow-up program. A name surfaced in decrypts from 1968, Cody named Chess Queen, associated with State Department document transfers. We traced the pattern and developed a list of 12 possible subjects. Your wife was number 7. Daniel said nothing. He was looking at a photograph dated September 12, 1975. The day he'd brought home the updated SIGINT intercept protocols for Soviet naval communications. He remembered that night. Catherine had made pot roast. Their daughter had fallen asleep on the couch. They'd watched Johnny Carson together. We had to be certain, Brennan continued. We couldn't move until we mapped her entire network. Her handler rotates every 8 months. We've identified 6 separate KGB officers involved in servicing her, all operating under diplomatic cover, all with full immunity. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel's voice sounded strange to himself. Because we needed to know if you were involved. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. We had to observe you both, separately and together. We monitored your phone. We tracked your movements. We examined your financial records, your mail, your trash. We put cameras in your neighbors' houses. We ran you through every counterintelligence protocol we have, and you're clean. As of 6 weeks ago, we determined you had no knowledge of your wife's activities. The polygraph confirmation on Tuesday was the final verification. Your reaction to the photograph was genuine. Daniel looked at Brennan. You've been investigating me for almost 3 years. Yes. While my wife was committing espionage using materials, I brought home, yes. And you said nothing. Brennan closed the folder. We said nothing because we needed to see the full scope of the operation. Because shutting down one asset means nothing if we don't understand the system. Because your wife is not the objective, Daniel. She's a window. He pulled out another folder. This one was thicker, marked with a classification level Daniel had never seen before. Since 1974, we've identified 17 separate individuals in the Washington area passing information to Soviet intelligence. All of them are connected through the same recruitment network. All of them were cultivated through peace organizations and anti-war groups in the late 60s. All of them have access to classified materials through their jobs or through family members with clearances. 17 that we know of. We believe there are more. The KGB has been running this network for almost a decade. They've gathered intelligence on SIGINT procedures, satellite reconnaissance, NATO communications protocols, nuclear command and control systems, and strategic air command operations. The damage assessment is still ongoing, but preliminary estimates suggest this is one of the most successful Soviet intelligence operations in the United States since the Manhattan Project. Daniel felt something cold settling into his chest. What happens now? Now we decide what to do with your wife. The decision-making process in counterintelligence operations during the Cold War followed a brutal logic that had nothing to do with justice or morality. The question was never, what did this person do, but rather, what can we gain from what this person did? The FBI and CIA had been running double-agent operations since the 1950s, feeding false information to the Soviets through captured assets, using compromised networks to spread disinformation and identify other spies. Catherine Warren was valuable not because she could be punished, but because she could be used. Brennan explained the options with the clinical detachment of a man describing pest control procedures. They could arrest her immediately, which would alert the Soviets and cause them to shut down the entire network. They could continue surveillance, which would gather more intelligence but risked her discovering the observation. Or they could turn her, make her a double agent, and use her to feed false information back to the KGB while simultaneously identifying everyone else in her network. The decision isn't yours, Brennan said. The decision isn't even mine. This goes to the counterintelligence staff at CIA, the FBI's Soviet division, and the National Security Council. But they're going to ask me what I think, and they're going to ask you what you're willing to do. What I'm willing to do. You're her husband. You have access to her in ways we never will. You can observe things we can't see. You can influence her behavior without her knowing she's being influenced. You're an intelligence professional. You understand operational security. You understand how to live a cover. Daniel understood what was being asked. You want me to go home and pretend nothing happened. I want you to go home and help us run your wife as a double agent against Soviet intelligence. The proposition was insane. It was also perfectly logical. Daniel had been trained in surveillance and counter-surveillance. He had spent 11 years analyzing Soviet operational patterns. He understood tradecraft, communication protocols, and security procedures better than almost anyone at NSA, and he had something no other intelligence officer had: intimate daily access to an active Soviet asset. If you can't do it, we understand, Brennan said. We'll bring her in tomorrow. She'll be arrested, charged under the Espionage Act, and prosecuted. She'll spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Your daughter will grow up visiting her mother behind bulletproof glass. Your career will be over. You'll spend the next decade being investigated to make absolutely certain you weren't involved. And the Soviets will burn the entire network and start over somewhere else. And if I do it, then you become part of an operation that could reshape Soviet intelligence operations in North America. You help us identify every person in her network. You help us feed false information that will poison their intelligence product for years. You help us understand exactly what they know and exactly what they think they know. And when we're done, when we've gotten everything we can get, we shut it down quietly. No arrests, no trials, no publicity. Your wife disappears into a witness protection program. You get divorced for reasons that have nothing to do with espionage. Your daughter never knows the truth, and I just live with this. You live with a lot of things in this business, Daniel. You've been living with secrets for 11 years. This is just one more. Daniel went home that evening at his usual time. He stopped at the same 7-Eleven for cigarettes. He pulled into his driveway at 6:15 p.m., same as always. Catherine was in the kitchen making dinner. Pork chops, mashed potatoes, green beans. Their daughter was watching television in the living room. The house smelled like home. He kissed Catherine hello and asked about her day. She told him about the errands she'd run, the groceries she'd bought, the neighbor who'd complained about their tree dropping leaves in her yard. Normal conversation, normal life. The same conversation they'd had 1,000 times. She asked about his day. He told her it had been fine. Meetings, reports, the usual. Nothing he could talk about. They ate dinner together. Their daughter talked about school, about a science project on the solar system, about a boy in her class who'd gotten in trouble for throwing erasers. Normal family dinner. Normal American evening. After dinner, Daniel helped clean up while Catherine put their daughter to bed. He could hear her reading a bedtime story through the wall. Charlotte's Web. They'd been working through it for 2 weeks. When Catherine came downstairs, he was in the living room watching the news. She sat beside him on the couch. They watched coverage of Carter's energy policy, a report on the Panama Canal treaties, a story about a plane crash in Tenerife. "I'm tired," Catherine said eventually. "I think I'll go up. I'll be up in a bit." She kissed him goodnight and went upstairs. Daniel sat in the dark living room for another hour, smoking cigarettes and thinking about the choice that wasn't really a choice. He thought about the photograph from the polygraph examination. He thought about the Woolworth parking lot. He thought about 9 years of lies, 9 years of betrayal, 9 years of his wife living a double life while he brought classified materials home and left them in his briefcase for her to photograph. He thought about how good she'd been at it, how completely he'd been fooled, how thoroughly she'd maintained her cover, how perfect her operational security had been. The KGB had trained her well. At 11 p.m., he went upstairs. Catherine was asleep, or pretending to be. He changed into pajamas and got into bed beside her. In the dark, she rolled toward him and put her arm across his chest, a gesture she'd made 10,000 times in 8 years of marriage. He lay awake until morning, feeling the weight of her arm, calculating what he was about to do. The mechanics of running a double agent are complex, but the psychological requirements are simple. You must be capable of sustained deception, emotional compartmentalization, and absolute commitment to the operation regardless of personal cost. Daniel Warren possessed all three qualities. He'd been trained in them. His entire professional life had been built on them. The operation began on March 25, 1977, 8 days after Daniel followed his wife to Springfield. His initial briefing took place in a windowless conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley. Present were Thomas Brennan from NSA, 2 officers from the FBI's Washington field office, 3 from CIA's counterintelligence staff, and a psychiatrist from the agency's medical services division who specialized in agent psychology. They showed him transcripts of Catherine's conversations that had been captured through surveillance. They showed him reports she had passed to the KGB, including several based on materials Daniel had brought home. They showed him the assessment of what she'd compromised: SIGINT intercept techniques for Soviet military communications, satellite reconnaissance capabilities, lists of NSA personnel with specialized language skills, technical specifications for signals intelligence equipment, and operational protocols for monitoring Soviet naval movements in the North Atlantic. The damage was significant but not catastrophic. Most of what Catherine had provided was technical detail rather than operational intelligence. The Soviets could use it to improve their communications security, but they couldn't use it to identify specific intelligence operations or compromise specific agents. "She's a collection asset, not an operational asset," explained Patricia Chun, the CIA officer running the briefing. Chun was 42, a career intelligence officer who'd spent 15 years running agents in Eastern Europe before being assigned to counterintelligence work in Washington. She gathers information and passes it along. She doesn't recruit. She doesn't handle other assets. She doesn't have access to the broader network. That makes her valuable to us because she doesn't know enough to protect anything except herself. The plan was straightforward in concept, nightmarish in execution. Daniel would continue his normal life and normal work. Catherine would continue her normal life and normal espionage. But everything Catherine saw from this point forward would be carefully controlled. Every document Daniel brought home would be selected by the counterintelligence team. Every piece of information Catherine photographed would be designed to serve American intelligence interests. Some of it would be genuine intelligence, accurate enough to maintain her credibility with the KGB. Some of it would be false, designed to mislead Soviet analysts about American capabilities. Some of it would be bait, designed to reveal how the Soviets were processing and distributing the intelligence they received. "You're going to be her handler," Chun said. "You're going to manage what she sees, control what she reports, and observe everything she does. You're going to live with her, sleep with her, raise your daughter with her, and never let her know that you know." For how long? As long as it takes to map the network and neutralize it without alerting Moscow Center. Months? Years? We don't know. The psychiatrist, a thin man named Dr. Raymond Kovacs, spoke up for the first time. "The psychological stress of this operation will be extreme. You'll be living in a state of constant deception with the person closest to you. You'll be unable to express anger, betrayal, or grief. You'll have to maintain the appearance of a normal marriage while conducting a counterintelligence operation against your own wife. Most people couldn't sustain this. Most people would break." "I'm not most people." "No," Kovacs agreed. "You're not. That's why you're being asked to do this. But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. This will change you, permanently. The things you'll have to do, the lies you'll have to tell, the emotional suppression you'll have to maintain. These aren't things people recover from easily. Daniel looked at the psychiatrist. I've been lying professionally for 11 years. I can lie to my wife. You've been withholding information, Kovacs corrected. That's different from active deception. What we're asking you to do is sustain an intimate relationship that is entirely false while using that relationship to betray someone you once loved. The psychological term for that is instrumental manipulation. It's a form of abuse. She's been betraying her country for 9 years using access I provided. I'd call that abuse too. Chun intervened. We need to be clear about something. This operation is voluntary. You can refuse. No one will judge you. We'll proceed with arrest and prosecution, and you'll be free to rebuild your life. But if you agree to this, you're committed. You can't change your mind. You can't confess. You can't break operational security. Not with friends, not with family, not with therapists, not with anyone. This becomes your life. Daniel thought about the photograph of Catherine standing outside Safeway with a KGB officer. He thought about the Minex camera hidden in a box of tampons. He thought about 9 years of marriage built on lies. When do I start? They gave him a contact protocol. Once a week he would meet with his handler, an FBI agent named Robert Carlson who would pose as a colleague from NSA. They would meet at rotating locations. Standard counter-surveillance procedures, always maintaining the appearance of casual friendship. Carlson would provide the materials for Daniel to bring home. Carlson would receive reports on Catherine's behavior, her movements, her contacts. They gave him training in surveillance detection, communication protocols, and crisis management. They taught him how to document Catherine's activities without her knowledge, how to observe her dead drop procedures, how to identify changes in her behavior that might indicate she discovered the operation. They gave him a cover story for the psychological strain they knew would show: work stress, a difficult project, pressure from management. Catherine would believe it. Everyone would believe it. They gave him a panic protocol in case Catherine discovered the truth, a phone number to call, an extraction procedure, a safe house in Maryland, and then they sent him home. He walked into his house that evening carrying a briefcase containing a technical manual on satellite reconnaissance procedures. The manual was genuine. The information in it was accurate, but certain sections had been subtly altered. Technical specifications changed by small amounts. Operational procedures modified in ways that would only become apparent when the Soviets tried to apply the intelligence. Catherine made dinner. Chicken casserole. Their daughter had gotten a B on her science project. The solar system model she'd built was good, but she'd forgotten to include Pluto's orbital eccentricity. After dinner, Daniel left his briefcase in the study as he always did. He watched television with Catherine. They went to bed. At 2:30 a.m., he woke to the sound of the study door opening. He lay still in the dark, listening. The soft rustle of papers. The faint click of a camera shutter, barely audible. The careful replacement of documents. The quiet closing of the briefcase. Catherine returned to bed 14 minutes later. She settled beside him, her breathing steady and calm. She smelled like ivory soap and cold cream. She smelled like home. Daniel stared at the ceiling until dawn, thinking about everything he'd lost and everything he was about to do. The first 3 months were the hardest, not because the operational requirements were difficult, but because the psychological bifurcation required to maintain the deception was like living with a blade lodged between his ribs. Every morning Daniel woke beside a woman he'd promised to love and protect, knowing that he was systematically destroying her life. Every evening he came home and kissed her hello, knowing that within hours she would betray him again. Every night he lay in the dark listening to her photograph classified documents while he pretended to sleep. The human mind is not designed for this kind of sustained cognitive dissonance. Dr. Kovacs had warned him. But Daniel discovered that the mind, when properly motivated and rigorously disciplined, could adapt to almost anything. He began to think of Catherine in operational terms. Not as his wife, but as chess queen, the codename from the Venona decrypts. Not as the mother of his child, but as a Soviet asset requiring management and control. The emotional detachment came easier than he'd expected. Or perhaps it had always been there, buried under the performance of marriage, waiting to be excavated. His meetings with Robert Carlson followed a careful rhythm. Every Thursday at 11 a.m., they met at different locations around Washington, a bench near the Lincoln Memorial, a deli in Georgetown, a parking garage in Roslyn. The meetings never lasted more than 20 minutes. Carlson would hand him materials in a manila envelope. Daniel would report Catherine's activities, her behavior, any deviations from established patterns. She photographed the satellite reconnaissance manual on March 26th. Daniel reported at their third meeting. Used the Minox camera. Took approximately 40 exposures. Returned everything to the briefcase by 2:47 a.m. Dead drop? March 29th. Tyson's Corner Mall, food court. She placed a shopping bag under a table near the Orange Julius stand at 2:15 p.m. Retrieved signal was a chalk mark on a newspaper vending machine outside Woodward and Lothrop. Standard protocol. Carlson made notes. Did you observe the pickup? Negative. FBI surveillance team confirmed the bag was retrieved at 3:40 p.m. by A. Male subject matching the description of Viktor Chernyshev, third secretary at the Soviet embassy. Diplomatic plates. Full immunity. Good. The modified specifications in that manual are going to cause them significant problems when they try to implement countermeasures. We're already seeing indications that Soviet satellite tracking stations are recalibrating based on the false parameters. It's working. It was working. The entire operation was working. Catherine continued her espionage activities without any indication she suspected surveillance. The KGB continued to service her drops and request specific intelligence categories. And American counterintelligence continued to feed carefully crafted disinformation into the Soviet intelligence system while mapping every person. Catherine contacted every location she used, every procedure she followed. By June 1977, they had identified 23 separate individuals connected to Catherine's network. Not all of them were active assets. Some were unwitting facilitators, people who provided access or cover without knowing they were supporting espionage. But 11 of them were confirmed Soviet agents, passing classified information through the same recruitment and handling network that had cultivated Catherine. The network was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had initially suspected. It included a translator at the State Department, an electronics technician at a defense contractor, a civilian analyst at the Pentagon, a research librarian at the Library of Congress, and a clerk at the Department of Energy. Together, they provided the KGB with access to diplomatic communications, weapons systems specifications, military deployment plans, scientific research, and nuclear program details. The FBI designated it Operation Homeward and assigned 40 agents to full-time surveillance and investigation. The operation was compartmented at the highest levels. Even within the FBI and CIA, only a handful of people knew the full scope. The risk of a leak was too great. If the Soviets discovered they'd been compromised, the entire network would vanish overnight. Daniel's role expanded as the operation progressed. He wasn't just a passive observer anymore. He was an active participant in managing Catherine's intelligence production. The counterintelligence team would identify specific questions the Soviets were asking, then task Daniel to bring home materials that would answer those questions in ways that served American interests. In July, the Soviets requested information about new SIGINT collection techniques being developed for monitoring Warsaw Pact communications. Daniel brought home a technical manual describing a revolutionary new signal processing method that could isolate individual radio transmissions from overlapping frequencies. The manual was real. The technology was real. But the operational frequencies listed in the manual were wrong by exactly 15 kilohertz. A small enough discrepancy that Soviet engineers wouldn't immediately notice, but large enough that any countermeasures they developed would be completely ineffective. Catherine photographed the manual on July 18th. The dead drop was made on July 21st at a rest stop on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. FBI surveillance confirmed the pickup by a known KGB officer named Anatoly Grigoriev. 3 weeks later, NSA intercepts detected Soviet military communications units implementing new security procedures based on the false frequency data. The Soviets were now protecting the wrong frequencies while leaving their actual operational communications exposed. They trusted the intelligence, Carlson said at their meeting on August 11th. They implemented it without independent verification. That tells us something important about how they assess source reliability. Chess Queen has gold-plated credibility in Moscow's center. Everything she provides is being treated as verified reporting. How long can we sustain this before they realize they're being fed false data? Months, maybe years. The beauty of technical intelligence is that it's difficult to verify without extensive testing. And even when they do test, they might attribute failures to implementation errors rather than source compromise. We've seen this before with other operations. The Soviets tend to trust their assets longer than they should, but Daniel knew the operational clock was ticking. Every intelligence operation has a natural lifespan. Eventually, something breaks, someone talks, a pattern is noticed, a surveillance team is spotted. The longer Operation Homeward ran, the greater the risk of exposure. The psychological toll on Daniel was measurable. Dr. Kovacs conducted monthly evaluations, probing for signs of breakdown, depression, dissociation. Daniel passed every evaluation. He presented as stable, functional, emotionally controlled. But Kovacs noted in his reports that Daniel's affect had flattened considerably, that his emotional responses to even significant events had become muted, that he was exhibiting classic symptoms of chronic stress and defensive detachment. "You're holding together," Kovacs told him in September, "but you're not holding together well. Your emotional capacity is eroding." That's not a criticism. It's an observation. The human psyche can only sustain this level of deception for so long before permanent damage occurs. How long? I don't know. It varies by individual. Some people collapse in weeks, others last years. You're stronger than most, but you're not invulnerable. Then I guess we'd better finish this before I break. At home, Catherine remained unchanged. She cooked dinner, attended parent-teacher conferences, volunteered at the school library, had lunch with friends. She was an excellent mother. She was an attentive wife. She remembered birthdays and anniversaries. She asked Daniel about his work, knowing he couldn't tell her anything substantive, and accepted his vague answers without complaint. She was, in every observable way, exactly what she appeared to be, a suburban housewife living an ordinary American life. Except for the espionage, Daniel watched her navigate both worlds with seamless precision. There was no visible stress, no apparent guilt, no indication that she felt any conflict between her identity as a mother and her activities as a Soviet agent. She'd compartmentalized just as effectively as he had, perhaps more so. She'd been doing it longer. He wondered sometimes what she thought about late at night when she was photographing documents. Did she believe she was serving a noble cause? Did she see herself as a warrior for peace, preventing nuclear war through the equalization of military intelligence? Did she rationalize it as victimless crime, just information, just data, nothing that would get anyone killed? Or did she simply not think about it at all? Was it just a job, a task, something she did efficiently and then moved on from? He would never know. The operation required that he never confront her, never reveal his knowledge, never give her the opportunity to explain or justify. She had to remain unaware. She had to continue operating normally. That was the whole point. In October, the KGB requested information about American strategic bomber operations. Specifically, they wanted to know about the maintenance schedules and operational readiness of B-52 squadrons stationed at Air Force bases on the East Coast. It was the kind of intelligence that could inform Soviet targeting decisions in the event of war. It was the kind of intelligence that could get people killed. The counterintelligence team debated whether to provide it. The argument lasted 3 hours in a secure conference room at Langley. If they refused to give Catherine material to photograph, her handlers might become suspicious. If they gave her false information that was too obviously false, the same problem. But if they gave her genuine intelligence on bomber operations, they were potentially compromising national security to maintain an operation. Patricia Chun made the final call. We give her real data, but we give her data that doesn't matter. Maintenance schedules from 6 months ago. Operational readiness statistics that are already outdated. Information that's technically accurate but strategically useless. The Soviets won't know it's stale until they try to act on it. And by then we'll have moved the operation to the next phase. Daniel brought home a classified report on B-52 maintenance operations dated April 1977. It was authentic. Everything in it was true. It was also completely irrelevant to current bomber deployments. Catherine photographed it on October 14th. The dead drop was made on October 17th at a shopping center in Silver Spring. KGB pickup confirmed. 2 days later, NSA intercepts revealed Soviet military intelligence distributing the bomber maintenance data to targeting analysis units. They were treating it as current intelligence. They were making operational decisions based on information that was 6 months out of date. It's almost too easy, Carlson said. They're so hungry for intelligence on strategic systems that they're not quality checking what they receive. Chess Queen has become such a reliable source that they've stopped verifying her material independently. That won't last. No, it won't, which is why we're accelerating the timeline. The decision had been made at the highest levels. Operation Homeward would conclude in early 1978. The network had been mapped. The disinformation had been placed. The intelligence damage had been assessed. Continuing the operation beyond that point increased the risk of exposure without proportional benefit. The endgame would be carefully orchestrated. No arrests, no public trials, no media coverage. The entire network would be quietly neutralized through a combination of administrative actions, security reassignments, and witness protection programs. The Soviets would realize eventually that something had gone wrong. But by then the sources would be gone, and the intelligence channels would be dead. Catherine would be the last to go. Her credibility with the KGB was too valuable to waste. They would continue running her through December 1977, feeding progressively more damaging disinformation before shutting her down in January. Daniel received his final instructions in November. On January 15, 1978, he would tell Catherine he wanted a divorce. The reason would be generic: irreconcilable differences, growing apart, the standard language of marital dissolution. She would be confused but not suspicious. Marriages ended all the time. What Catherine wouldn't know was that the divorce papers had already been prepared by Justice Department attorneys. She wouldn't know that her house was about to be raided by FBI agents with a sealed warrant. She wouldn't know that she would be offered a choice: 20 years in federal prison or complete cooperation with a counterintelligence debriefing followed by permanent relocation under a new identity. She wouldn't know that her husband had been running her as a double agent for 10 months. She wouldn't know that everything she thought she'd accomplished had been turned against her. She wouldn't know until it was too late to do anything but accept. Christmas 1977 was Daniel's last Christmas with his daughter in anything resembling a normal family. They decorated a tree together. They baked cookies. They watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer on television. His daughter sat between him and Catherine on the couch, eating popcorn, laughing at the island of misfit toys. Catherine held his hand. She smiled at him. She looked happy. He wondered if any of it had ever been real. On January 12, 1978, Daniel brought home one final document. It was a comprehensive analysis of American SIGINT capabilities in the Arctic, detailing satellite coverage patterns, signal intercept stations, and operational procedures for monitoring Soviet submarine communications in the North Atlantic. It was the most sensitive material Catherine had ever been given access to. It was also completely fabricated. Every specification was false. Every operational detail was invented. Every capability assessment was designed to mislead Soviet naval intelligence into believing American surveillance coverage had gaps that didn't exist. Catherine photographed it on January 13th. She made the dead drop on January 14th at a gas station in Fairfax. FBI surveillance confirmed the pickup. That evening, Daniel told her he wanted a divorce. She stared at him across the kitchen table, not understanding. "What are you talking about?" "I think we should separate." "I've been thinking about this for a while. I don't think this is working anymore." "Daniel, where's this coming from? Did something happen? Is there someone else?" "No, nothing like that. I just think we've grown apart. I think it's time." She started crying. Real tears, real confusion, real pain. "Is this about work?" "I know you've been stressed. Whatever it is, we can work through it. We can go to counseling. I've made up my mind." He went upstairs and packed a bag. Catherine followed him, still crying, still trying to understand. Their daughter heard the commotion and came out of her room, frightened. "Daddy, what's happening?" "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a few days. Everything's going to be okay." It was the last lie he told in his own house. He stayed in a hotel in Arlington for 3 days. On January 18, 1978, at 6 a.m., FBI agents executed a search warrant at the Alexandria house. They found the Minix camera in a box of tampons in the bathroom. They found 18 rolls of exposed film in a false bottom in Catherine's jewelry box. They found a one-time pad cipher concealed inside a hardcover book. They found a list of dead drop locations written in microscopic text on the inside of a lipstick tube. Catherine was arrested and taken to a federal detention facility. She was held without bail under sealed indictment. She wasn't allowed to contact anyone except her attorney, who was briefed on the evidence and the government's offer. The offer was simple: cooperate or die in prison. She cooperated. Her debriefing lasted 6 weeks. She told them everything: her recruitment at Georgetown, her handlers over the years, every document she'd photographed, every dead drop she'd made, every person in the network she'd ever met or heard about. She gave them names they already knew and names they didn't. She gave them locations, procedures, communication protocols. She gave them everything the KGB had taught her and everything she'd learned on her own. When the debriefing was complete, Catherine Warren ceased to exist. Her name was changed. Her history was erased. She was relocated to a city she'd never visited, with a job she'd never trained for, and an identity she'd never chosen. She was forbidden from ever contacting her daughter again. She was forbidden from ever returning to Virginia. She was forbidden from ever acknowledging that she had been Catherine Warren. Daniel was granted full custody of their daughter. He told her that her mother had left, that sometimes marriages ended, that it wasn't her fault. His daughter cried for weeks. She asked when Mommy was coming back. He said he didn't know. He never told her the truth. The truth was classified. The other members of the network were handled similarly. No arrests, no trials, no publicity. They were confronted with evidence, offered the deal, and relocated. By March 1978, all 23 individuals connected to Operation Homeward had been neutralized. The entire network had been dismantled without the Soviets ever knowing exactly what had happened. The KGB eventually realized something had gone wrong. Their sources stopped responding. Dead drops went unserviced. Communication channels went silent. They conducted their own investigation, but by then the trail was cold. The people were gone. The evidence had been sanitized. Moscow's center concluded that the network had been compromised, probably through some kind of signals intelligence breakthrough or a defector they didn't know about. They never suspected that one of their most productive assets had been turned into a double agent by her own husband. The intelligence damage from Operation Homeward was substantial. The Soviets had based strategic decisions on false data. They had recalibrated military systems using incorrect specifications. They had deployed countermeasures that didn't work. The disinformation campaign would degrade Soviet intelligence capabilities for years. The operation was considered one of the most successful counterintelligence actions of the Cold War. Patricia Chun received a promotion. Thomas Brennan received a commendation. Robert Carlson received a Distinguished Service Medal. Daniel Warren received nothing except permission to continue his life. He stayed at NSA until 1985, when he took early retirement at age 43. His daughter graduated high school that year and went to college at Penn State. She studied biology. She became a teacher. She got married and had children of her own. She never saw her mother again. She never knew why. Daniel never remarried. He lived alone in a townhouse in Bethesda, working occasional consulting jobs for defense contractors, maintaining his security clearance, saying nothing to anyone about what he'd done. Dr. Kovacs's prediction had been correct. The psychological damage was permanent. Daniel had learned to live with sustained deception so effectively that he could no longer fully separate performance from reality. He had feelings, but they were muted, distant, like watching emotions happen to someone else. He had relationships, but they were superficial, transactional, carefully managed to prevent intimacy. He had become, in every meaningful way, a man without a center. In 1995, when the Venona decrypts were declassified, Daniel read through them with clinical interest. He found the references to Chess Queen, the fragmentary evidence that had started the investigation. He traced the operational history, the recruitment, the years of intelligence gathering that had eventually led to Catherine's identification. He wondered sometimes where she was, whether she was still alive, whether she ever thought about him or their daughter, whether she'd found some way to live with what she'd done. He wondered if she'd become hollow too. The file on Operation Homeward remains partially classified. Certain details are still sealed, certain names redacted. The official record shows that a Soviet intelligence network was successfully penetrated, monitored, and neutralized. It shows that disinformation was successfully introduced into Soviet intelligence channels. It shows that American counterintelligence achieved a significant operational victory. It does not show what the victory cost. It does not show that Daniel Warren spent 10 months running a counterintelligence operation against his own wife. It does not show that he used his marriage as cover for espionage exactly as the Soviets had done. It does not show that he became, in the service of his country, exactly the kind of person he'd sworn to stop. The moral mathematics of intelligence work have never been clean. During the Cold War, they were particularly ugly. The justification was always the same. The threat was existential. The stakes were survival. The methods were necessary. Individual suffering was acceptable if it prevented collective catastrophe. Daniel accepted that justification. He internalized it. He built his life around it. But acceptance doesn't mean peace, and justification doesn't mean redemption. He died in 2003, at age 61, of a heart attack in his townhouse. His daughter found him 3 days later when he missed their weekly phone call. Among his possessions was a locked filing cabinet containing personal papers, photographs, and a manila envelope marked "Do Not Open." His daughter never opened it. She had no security clearance. She had no right to know. She buried her father with military honors and returned to her life, carrying the same incomplete history she'd always carried, never knowing the full truth about what her mother had done or what her father had become. The envelope remained sealed. The secrets remained secret. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked, in the end. Operation Homeward succeeded because one man was willing to weaponize his marriage against the woman he'd once loved. It succeeded because the line between loyalty and betrayal, between duty and destruction, between protecting something and becoming what you're protecting against, that line wasn't just blurred, but entirely erased. The Cold War demanded this erasure from thousands of people on both sides. It demanded that individuals sacrifice not just their lives, but their humanity in service of ideological abstractions and geopolitical necessities. It demanded that people become instruments, tools, assets. It demanded that the private sphere collapse completely into the operational sphere. Daniel Warren met that demand. He became exactly what was required. He sustained the deception, managed the operation, achieved the objective. And if somewhere in the process he lost the ability to feel what loss meant, if he spent the rest of his life functioning but not living, performing but not being, if he became a shell containing only duty and procedure and carefully maintained emptiness, well, that was just the cost of doing business in a world where trust was a vulnerability and intimacy was a security risk. The Cold War ended in 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed. The ideological contest that had justified Operation Homeward and 10,000 operations like it simply ceased to exist. The urgency evaporated. The existential threat dissipated. The justifications rang hollow in retrospect. But the damage remained. Personal, psychological, permanent. Daniel Warren's story is not unique. It's repeated in countless variations across the decades of the Cold War. Different names, different operations, different methods. But always the same basic transaction: humanity exchanged for security. Relationship weaponized for intelligence. Trust converted into operational advantage. The classified files contain thousands of these stories. Most will never be fully declassified. Most of the people involved are dead now. Most of the secrets they kept have ceased to matter in any practical sense. But they mattered once. They mattered enough that people destroyed their lives and the lives of others in service of keeping them. They mattered enough that the machinery of state security consumed individuals and converted them into tools. They mattered enough that a man could spend 10 months betraying his wife in order to catch her betraying her country. And somehow both betrayals were considered necessary, justified, and ultimately forgettable. If stories like this make you question the price paid for the world we inherited from that era, if they make you wonder what remained of people after they'd been used this way, if they make you think about the human cost that never appears in the strategic assessments and official histories, then perhaps these stories still serve a purpose. Perhaps remembering what people became in the shadow of that long twilight struggle is itself a form of resistance. A refusal to let the sacrifices be forgotten. Even when the sacrifices were morally ambiguous, psychologically destructive, and ultimately dehumanizing. Consider subscribing if you want more stories about the men and women who lived through the Cold War's machinery and came out the other side broken, compromised, and forever changed. These are not celebrations of heroism. They are examinations of cost, and the cost was higher than most people know.